Welcome back to The Explainer. If you're a focused learner trying to cut through the noise and get straight to the heart of some really complex ideas, well, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're taking an impartial, deep dive into a pretty dense and politically charged theoretical argument from a recent source. It's all about the geopolitical and social dynamics over in the Horn of Africa. The source lays out this fascinating sociopolitical thesis centered on what it calls the civilized nominal Oromo. Now, our goal today isn't to take sides or endorse any specific viewpoints. Instead, we're going to systematically unpack this framework, figure out exactly what the creator is arguing, and piece together the puzzle as we go. Okay, let's dive into this cognitive roadmap. First, we'll nail down the core argument. Second, we're going to contrast the two main worldviews. Third, we'll map out the mechanics of assimilation. Fourth, we'll profile the gatekeepers themselves. And finally, we'll look at the proposed path to decolonization. All right. Section 1. The core argument. Identifying the gatekeepers. Who exactly are we talking about here? So, the central thesis of our source defines these civilized nominal Oromo as individuals of Oromo biological descent who, sure, might keep some superficial markers of their identity, but who have essentially fully assimilated into the ideological apparatus of the Ethiopian state. And according to the text, this assimilation doesn't come for free. It comes at the direct expense of their own indigenous epistemology and collective liberation. The author makes the case that this specific demographic functions as the primary gatekeepers. They are the ideological shield bearers of what the source describes as a predatory settler colonial empire, basically enforcing its rules from the inside out. Moving right along to Section 2, contrasting worldviews, the dual matrix. The creator builds this entire argument on a really stark dichotomy. Let's play jargon buster for a second and define the first system exactly as the source describes it. It's called Oromummaa. Now, the text makes a huge point to emphasize that this is absolutely not just an ethnic label. It's way bigger than that. It's a comprehensive, living way of seeing the world, an emancipatory philosophy, if you will. It's rooted in the indigenous Gada system, which the source describes as fundamentally democratic and egalitarian at its core. Oromummaa relies heavily on principles like cosmic balance, which is known as Safu, as well as reciprocity and a really deep sense of collective solidarity. Basically, it's presented to us as a worldview that inherently rejects hierarchy and tyranny. Now, on the total flip side of this dichotomy is what the source terms the settler colonial imperial matrix. This refers to the Ethiopian imperial state, which the creator argues is an artificial construct built entirely on hierarchical, feudal, and inherently assimilationist foundations. The source leans heavily into some dense sociological concepts here. We're talking Gramscian theories of cultural hegemony, which is basically when a ruling class dominates a culturally diverse society, and Fanonian perspectives, which look at the psychological ways colonized people actually internalize their own oppression. Using these lenses, the source analyzes how this state historically engineered a system that demanded strict, unquestioning conformity. And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate friction point of the text. On one hand, you have Oromummaa, defined by egalitarianism and balance. On the other hand, you've got imperial hegemony, demanding hierarchy and assimilation. The source argues that you literally cannot reconcile the two. It claims the imperial system was designed so that any upward mobility within it was strictly contingent upon abandoning those egalitarian values to serve the hierarchical structure. It's an either-or scenario. This brings us to Section 3, the mechanics of assimilation. Let's look at exactly how the source claims the empire historically manufactured these gatekeepers. The source actually gives us a very specific chronological context to ground all of this. It points back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, arguing that the state was consolidated through violent military conquest. This subjugation was allegedly fueled by European firearms, deep financial backing, and mentorship from foreign empire builders like the Swiss engineer Alfred Ilg, who, surprisingly enough, became a de facto foreign minister for the empire. But the physical conquest was really just phase one. The historical trajectory then shifted to a systematic deculturation and psychological re-engineering of the Oromo people. And that, the author argues, leads directly to our contemporary era and the eventual production of this civilized nominal Oromo that the text is critiquing today. So, to be deemed civilized, the system demanded a pretty harsh psychological trade-off. First, individuals had to completely or partially shed their indigenous identity. Then they were required to adopt the Amharic language and the Orthodox religion as the ultimate, unquestionable standard of civility. Finally, they had to swallow imperial narratives that actively erased their own history, their own governance, and their own cosmology. According to the framework we're unpacking, it was essentially a total psychological surrender in exchange for provisional privilege. All right, Section 4. Profile of the gatekeepers. What are the behavioral and psychological traits of these credentialed elites, according to the text? So, the crucial point here is how the source identifies 4 very specific operational traits for these individuals. It starts with epistemicide, which means viewing their own traditional institutions through a derogatory colonial lens. This, in turn, fuels a comprador mentality, where they eagerly execute resource extraction policies just to prove their loyalty to the state. The state then turns around and uses them in what the author calls weaponized assimilation, parading them as public mascots to mask bias and create an illusion of inclusion. Ultimately, all of this results in an inversion of solidarity, meaning they align directly with the oppressor class instead of standing with the oppressed. A really fascinating concept introduced right here is null wisdom. The creator argues that because these assimilated elites have been systematically stripped of authentic Oromo, they exist in this massive psychological and intellectual vacuum. The text claims that even if they possess a ton of formal Western education, they are profoundly illiterate when it comes to indigenous philosophy, moral boundaries, or safu, and traditional governance. The core argument is that this precise ignorance, this null wisdom, completely strips them of communal accountability, and that leads directly to opportunism and complicity in state-sanctioned violence against their own kin. The text then takes all this theory and connects it directly to contemporary geopolitical issues. The source observes that the Ethiopian state is currently facing massive structural crises and a rapidly rising consciousness among Oromo youth. In a volatile modern landscape like this, the utility of these gatekeepers becomes absolutely paramount to the state's very survival. So you might be wondering, how exactly do they manage this modern crisis? Let's see how this builds, because the source outlines a very specific 2-pronged operational strategy used to neutralize revolutionary momentum today. The first tactic is ideological laundering. Basically, they author narratives that reframe legitimate Oromo self-determination as narrow nationalism, or even a direct threat to national unity. The second tactic is internal pacification. By occupying key leadership roles within regional structures, these elites promise reform to quiet dissent, while actually just delivering the continued subjugation of the people under a shiny new guise. They essentially manage the crisis from the inside. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, the path to decolonization. What is the source's proposed theoretical resolution to this entire geopolitical dynamic? The creator concludes that true democratization in the Horn of Africa is going to require a whole lot more than just dismantling external physical structures of oppression. It requires a really profound cultural and psychological decolonization. According to the text, overcoming the debilitating impact of this nominal elite necessitates a conscious return to and a revitalization of authentic Oromummaa. The argument is that this indigenous epistemology has to be restored as a potent counter-hegemonic force in order to finally expose and dismantle the empire's gatekeepers for good. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on. If we accept the source's premise for a moment, that psychological decolonization and the rejection of a nominal elite are the true keys to dismantling deeply rooted imperial matrices, how might this exact same analytical framework apply to other post-colonial landscapes globally? Whether you totally agree with the author's premise or completely disagree, it's undeniably a powerful lens for examining how colonial structures might perpetuate themselves from within. Keep questioning, keep analyzing the complex structures around you, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.